Start.
Good morning. My name is Roman Olvera. Today's date is Tuesday, April 12th, 2021. The time is 9:26 a.m. This interview is being virtually conducted and recorded. I am interviewing Wally Hogan, who was born on November 8th, 1932, and served in the Korean War, and his hometown is Green Bay, Wisconsin. And he served between the years of February 2nd, 1952, and July 1st of 1953. Wally was a squad leader in the U.S. Army and served in the infantry. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Wally, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing great. The birthday's January 8th, 1932.
Oh, my bad. I'm so sorry about that.
I'm a little older.
Tried to make you sound a little younger there. Sorry.
There you go.
All right. So the first question is, what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was working for Rexnord as a sales correspondent until I received my draft notice in December of 1951.
And were you straight out of high school during this time, or how old were you?
I went right from high school to work. I wanted to work to build up some funds so that I could go to college at a later date. But then, of course, Uncle Sam called and that changed all my plans.
I see. So in our U.S. history class, we were aware that there was a draft system, but we didn't go into the details of how that worked. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, the draft was by random drawings of those that were of the proper age. And unfortunately, my name was selected. It was purely a draft and it was a random selection. So you didn't know if you were going to get drafted or if you were going to get drafted.
I see. So in your file, it said that you were stationed for basic training in Fort Riley. And could you go over that a bit, over how long it was and what exactly you did there?
The basic training primarily is 3 months in duration. However, I got pneumonia, and so I actually spent an extra month there. And basically what it is you train for the use of the M1 rifle. You also learn to march with your backpack on your back for long periods of time. And while we were down there was a great flood, so we spent a lot of time putting dikes up around the military camp to prevent water from coming in.
I see. Sounds like a really hard time.
Great time.
So after you finish stationing in for basic training in Fort Riley, and then you shipped to Korea, correct?
No, I went home for 30 days R&R, and then from there I went to Seattle, Washington, and then over into Korea.
Oh, wow. Okay, so after all that, once you had to be shipped to Korea, how was that whole experience on the troop transport ship? It said in your file you were there for 13 days. How was that whole experience?
It was terrible. I personally didn't have any problems, but the majority of the troops on there got terribly seasick, and you know what happens to the stench. So most of us who were fine stayed topside so that we didn't have to go down below where all the sick people were.
Oh boy.
Long trip and a lot of rough water.
Wow, I bet. So after your basic training, do you feel like that whole experience prepared you for what was to come and adjusting back to military life?
Well, I don't know if you can ever be prepared for what happens, but I think the training I had was excellent. And I think it made me more aware of what's required and what we had to do in the case of confrontations.
Interesting. So when you said you got to Korea, what was Korea like, especially Chowan Valley where you were stationed?
Uh, Korea was very cold, very mountainous. And we landed in Busan, Korea, which is on the southern tip, and took a troop train up. And that troop train took us 4 days to get to the DMZ.
And so I read in your file again that in Korea you were a squad leader, correct?
That is correct.
So can you go over the duties of a squad leader and how it differs from a basic infantryman?
Well, the squad leader is responsible for 9 GIs. And in Korea, we had 4 Republic of Korea soldiers attached to each squad. They sent me to leadership school, prior to being promoted to a squad leader. And they basically taught me some of the ins and outs of what is required of a squad leader. Basically, you're in charge and responsible for the lives of 9 other soldiers plus 4 Republic of Korean soldiers. The only problem we had was really one of communications between us and the South Korean soldiers. But we would plan every night, we would plan trips into no man's land to seek out and see what the enemy was doing. And our squad would go out and we would then camp out there most of the night to see if we could see anything happening on the other side.
I'm glad you mentioned your experience with the Republic of Korea soldiers. And I was going to ask a similar question, but I'll phrase it slightly differently. How was that whole experience with communication with the Republic of Korean soldiers? And did you learn anything new with like working with them?
Well, I could not learn the language, that's for sure. But had 4 that were assigned to me were excellent soldiers. They were well trained. But occasionally I would get an interpreter in when we had big meetings and discussing future plans and help with the interpretation between us and them. But they were just great guys and good companions and good soldiers.
I'm glad to hear that. So again, you mentioned going to like the DMZ and then prior to actually seeing combat, did you sustain any injuries during your time in the service and during combat?
Yes, on October 24th, 1952, we were moving into a forward position when either the Chinese or the North Koreans opened up with mortar. I hollered to the squad to take cover, which we did. Unfortunately, a mortar landed pretty close and severed my right leg at the ankle and the big toe on my left. So I was in a wounded condition. And then I called for the medic, and the medic was very prompt, and he gave me morphine. And after that, I don't remember much other than the helicopter ride back to the MASH unit, where the MASH unit prepared me for further surgery. But the scariest part was being on the outside of that helicopter, strapped in and up high in the air.
Now, on a more lighter note to up the mood, could you say that the show MASH, the 90s sitcom or the 80s sitcom, was similar to your whole experience in the MASH unit?
Very similar. I was in and out of it most of the time while they did the surgery, but when I watch some of the MASH films, it certainly reminds me of the unit that I was in. It was a tent, and there were a lot of doctors around and orderlies and nurses. So yes, it's very similar to MASH, and I was a diehard fan of MASH.
I'm glad to hear that. Similar to the whole injury experience, in your file it said you went to Japan, to Hawaii, and then DC for treatment. What was going through your head during that whole travel experience? You were
Well,
injured.
I guess the one scary experience was the flight from Yokohama, Japan to Hawaii, because I was in a full body cast to protect the injuries that I had received. And all I could think of was if this plane went down, it would be all over. So we got to Hawaii safely, and they had to take the cast off because gangrene had set in for being enclosed for such a long time. And I spent about a week there while they cleaned up, and then I was off for San Francisco. The same thing happened in San Francisco. They had again removed the cast and cleaned up the gangrene, and then I was off for Washington, D.C.
So after you were discharged for your injuries, how was that whole experience reuniting back with family members?
I was medically discharged July 15th, I believe it was, 1953. And going home was just a great experience. I had a son born while I was in Korea, so I had an opportunity to see him for the first time. And my mother and mother-in-law saw to it that I had all the food I wanted, and it was good seeing old friends and rehabilitating myself to getting accustomed to walking with an artificial limb and all the other injuries that I'd received.
And on a similar note, how was that whole experience going from being a soldier to being a civilian and dad?
I would say it was a great experience. I took the opportunity to get my degree in business administration, thanks to the GI Bill from Syrian College, which was a business college in Milwaukee. It's now closed. And then I went back to work for Rex Nord and fit in well with the job I was doing. I eventually ended up, when I retired, as manager of the entire office.
I'm glad to hear that. You sound very accomplished.
Yeah,
So,
I guess it's the case. You got to make the best of what happened. I'd look around, especially at Walter Reed Hospital, and there were a lot of GIs in much worse shape than I was. And I was just glad to be alive and look forward to what lies ahead.
it's a very nice mindset to have.
Yeah.
So, did you manage to reconnect with any of your friends from the time of service, or?
Unfortunately, age has caught up with most of them. I have one that I know of that is still living, and he lives in Wind Lake, Wisconsin. And I talk to him periodically, but he's not in the best of health right now. He's 91 years old and kind of ill. But most of them, unfortunately, have gone before me, and I'm hanging in there.
Still young, still very young.
I'm a young 89.
Um, so looking back on your service, on your years of service, what would you say would be your most important contribution?
I would say the most important contribution I had was what I learned in service, how to be a better person. And I met so many great G, other GIs, and some of them, of course, were killed while I was over there. And so it was a great experience and something I'll always relish and enjoy. And if I had to do it over again, I'd probably go into service again.
Uh, and on a similar note, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. What were some life lessons you learned from the time of your service, since you said you would do it all over again?
Well, the important one is that you learn to trust one another. You have 9 GIs plus the 4 Republic of Korean, and you learn to trust them that they're going to watch you and protect you and make sure nothing happens. And I'm going to do the same for them. So I think I learned a great deal about trust and what leadership really means in the service.
Hmm, I like that. So another big question: do you feel that, considering you were drafted and you sustained injuries, do you feel like your whole time in the service affected how you view the military?
No, I don't think so. I have no bad feelings for the military. They were good to me. And since I was wounded, the government really takes care of me. I get the service I need from the Veterans Administration, and it's been truly outstanding.
Nice. Two similar questions. What advice would you give to soldiers right now in the military?
I would say thank God for your time. Listen to your subordinates and be a good soldier, and make sure you trust your buddy in whatever field you enter into. And just happy to be here today enjoying beautiful Wisconsin. Just like to comment too, we talked a little about Korea, but one of the real problems with Korea was the weather. We were there in the winter time, and it gets as cold as -20, -30 below zero with strong winds. So, and being mountainous, it made it extremely bad. And in the winter, in the summertime, uh, it doesn't get as warm as it would here in Florida or even Wisconsin. But the country is just fantastic. And I've been back to Korea 1, 2, 3 times since I was wounded. And I'm just amazed at the difference in the metropolitan area of where I was in Seoul, where it looks like a typical New York City. It's so westernized that it's just amazing what the people of Korea, with the help of other countries has really turned it around and is just a bastion of freedom. Really, really impressed with how they turned out.
Interesting. Um, the last question to wrap this up, probably my favorite question of them all. What advice would you give to the young boys and girls that are looking forward to join the military?
I would say if you join the military, give it your all, respect your leadership, and be close to your buddies and your friends.
Nice.
And I
Oh,
just one high note before I quit.
oh yeah.
You know, as I mentioned, I went to work at Rexford and stayed there for 32 years. But during that time, I had the opportunity to become involved in the Veterans of Foreign Wars and had the opportunity to be commander in chief of the 4.2 million people at comrades at that time. So that was a great experience. I had visited all 50 states and 42 foreign countries in that time.
I just have to keep asking questions about that. That sounds really interesting. What exactly do you do with that organization of Veterans of Foreign Wars? Can you elaborate on that a little bit
Well,
more?
that's an organization that the eligibility is based on having served in a war or like they call what they call Desert Storm and Desert Shield. They weren't actually war skirmishes, but that entitles you to eligibility to the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And the Congress has recognized that and issued a proclamation that anyone on their DD 214, which is the discharge paper, if they show eligibility because of World War I, World War II, Korea, Afghanistan, all those other countries, they are eligible to join the VFW. So it's the oldest veterans organization for those served overseas.
Hmm. And you'd say your time spent, you're very prideful about your time in the organization, correct?
Oh yes, very proud. Met some great people, and everywhere I went, I was received well, and I have always respected the treatment that I received as commander in chief of the organization, which I said was 4.2 million at that time. It's since gone down because of the many losses from World War II, deceased.
I see. And one more similar question, because you are very familiar with this aspect of helping veterans, right?
Yes.
So, what do you think we could do to better support our veterans coming home from war or just their time in the service?
Well, I would think that I'm just based on my experience that the treatment I've received is excellent. As far as I'm concerned, they can not do much more than they've done for me. But I would just wish they'd recognize that the service to your country is very important. Those who have given their time, their family, some their lives, some wounded. And I think they should be respected and treated fairly.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Uh, Anything you feel that we could expand upon, or anything that I missed in asking questions?
I would just make a couple comments. First of all, that when I got back from Korea and was in the rehab in Fort in Fort not Fort DC,
Mhm.
Reed Army Hospital. Uh, I had the opportunity to go and visit with with veterans. I keep getting notes here. But I guess when you talk about veterans and helping veterans, I think one of the most important parts when I traveled as commander in chief was I went to Ecuador. They were having some uprisings in Ecuador, and the VFW said we'd like to go down there and get a firsthand report. So I went down to Ecuador, and one of the stops we made was at a hospital. And at that point in time, the country was being decimated with landmines. And unfortunately, most of the children that were in the hospital were a result of stepping on landmines. So there were about 50 kids in this complex that I went into, and I started talking to them and telling them about my experiences. And then I got the idea that it might be a good idea to show them. So what I did is I took off my leg, showed them the stump, and told them the things that you could do even though you were disabled, and that would be like golfing and bowling. And so they were impressed, and I hopefully when I left there was a lot more enthusiasm and a better outlook on life for those children, because it was very hard times in Ecuador.
I'm glad that you did that. That sounds absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and also I didn't mention it, but there was a heavy influx in Korea of the Chinese. Had just about won the war when they crossed the Yalu River, and that really turned things around. That's where we ended up with the 50th parallel there.
Yeah.
See, where half is North Korea and half is South Korea, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, we learned that in history, and we were pretty disappointed about hearing that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
wish they'd done what Germany did when they consolidated and became one nation again, but I don't think that's going to happen in the near future.
yeah. All right. So, in closing, this has been an interview of veteran Wally Hogan regarding his service in the Korean War. My name is Roman Olvera. The time is 9:47. Wally, thank you for agreeing for this interview, and more importantly, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Ramon, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope I have imparted some wisdom on you, talking about my experiences, which I thought were just outstanding. And I've had a good life, a good full life. 89 years is young, and I hope that you put this to good use and share it with other people, because I think it's important that this country knows the sacrifices that veterans made years ago and continue today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's you know what's nice though, seeing you in person. Not really in person, but at least see the face to tie in with your name. But
All right.
what are you, a senior at the? Are you a senior?
Junior.
A junior. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you plan on a military service?
Actually, I was planning on going to college first and then hopefully being like an officer. But
Oh, great, great. So you're looking at OCS school, officer candidate school, or something like that?
yeah, but I need to narrow down the branch first. That's the big
Oh,
thing for me.
yeah, my granddaughter and grandson went to Waukesha South.
Oh, really?
Are you Waukesha South?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought so.
Yeah. I know that.
Well, that's about all I have. But again, it's been great. I've enjoyed it, and I wish you the best of luck in all your future endeavors. And if you need a phone call, need some help, or talk to somebody, I'm only a phone call away.
I thank you so much. You can't.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Take care, Ramon.
You as well.
I can wait to stretch it. Yeah.
Hi.
Were we close? Had to be close.
Do we end the call or?
No, hang on for just a minute.
All right.
Here we go. Okay. Just a minute.